I'd now like to introduce Maggie Steven, who is Senior Advisor and Deputy Area Director for ACAS, and her session is about duty of care, developing a menopause policy that protects staff and organisations alike. Over to you, Maggie. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Morning, everybody. Can I just check that I am showing my slides? Karen, if you can just let me, great. It's always one of those real concerns. So one of those biggest stress when you're ever talking at anything is, are the slides showing? Can you hear me? So Sarah, huge thank you. That was a brilliant session, really interesting. And I think one of the things I'd say, you know, as you get closer to the menopause, and I just absolutely, so much of what Sarah says, I'll probably go over a little bit more detail in some of the areas. But why is it taking so long to talk about this? So important. So yes, I'm a senior advisor at ACAS, based in the West Midlands. For those that don't know about ACAS, we are a government-funded organisation. We are impartial, independent from the government, which is critical. So if anyone wants to go through to a employment tribunal, they do have to come through and use ACAS's services to log and start that journey towards a tribunal. But as part of that, we support with individual conciliation. So working with the individual and the organisation to see if there's ways of getting that relationship back on track, or bringing about a resolution that's mutually agreeable. But a lot of people don't realise how much else we do. So a quick slide here. We've got a website that's got a huge amount of employment advice that will help both employers and employees. And that's got him, sorry, just a distraction. I'm just noticed that somebody's trying to message me. Yes, so a huge amount of information on our website on anything to do with employment. That could be, well, there's certainly an area on menopause, but equally consultation, redundancies, how to develop your managers. So a wide range. We have a helpline that's there for, generally it's there for employees to ring to ask for advice, but a lot of employers also use it. As a senior advisor, I work directly with employers to try and help build good employment relations. And we offer training. We've got a website, Facebook account. We deliver conferences. And last year we trained 65,000 delegates across a whole range of employment issues. So, and as I said, coming back to it, the critical thing about ACAS is we remain impartial. We are never on a side as such from an employer or an employer. Our work really is to work with both sides to kind of bring about good employment relations, resolutions, aid productivity for the UK community. So, so what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to look at 4 key areas in terms of the menopause. So look at how to use related policies to inform and support within the workplace. And part of, when I move on to the next session, part of it will be actually, do you need a policy within your organisation? There may be some debate on this. Then look at performing risk assessments and addressing the findings. So there was a question about that earlier on, and very much actually risk assessments are critical in supporting with the menopause. And then look at some of the flexible working options and reasonable adjustments. And finally, just going into a bit more detail, Sarah kind of alluded to earlier, but looking at the legal responsibilities under the Equality Act and duty of care for employers. So happy to take questions as we go along, but equally happy to take questions right at the end as well. So I would, for me personally, and different people are going to have different views on this, I'm not sure whether or not a policy is right. And these are my reasons for it, is that every person experiences the menopause differently, as everyone experiences bereavement differently. Everyone experiences, so many conditions in a different way. And the problem slightly with policies is that if you have, and then some of the employment tribunal cases have identified this, people have a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to kind of applying policy, and actually often it's not about just applying that policy, it's listening to the individual. So for me, I think actually develop a cross-board workplace menopause strategy. And maybe you have a policy within that, but guidelines actually are really good. And guidelines, obviously, exactly that. They don't kind of put you into a very kind of constrained frameworks, which some policies, depending how they're written, can do. So in terms of developing that policy, that strategy, I think the first thing is, why are you doing it? Sarah talked about the business case, and there's a really, really important business case in so much that losing talent and real skills out of the workplace just because of not making some reasonable adjustments, not listening. And I don't think any business can afford to lose the kind of the breadth of skills that potentially they might do if they don't address the menopause within the workplace. And that's without even just supporting the individual, you know, for their well-being. So look at what the aim and objective is that you're looking to do with your menopause strategy. Link to your other policies, because in terms of, or your guidelines, in terms of developing how best to support within your workplace, you'll already have, I would hope, a wellbeing strategy, an absence policy, and a number of other areas, you know, whether that's kind of personal development, learning and development, any of those areas, to look at those policies and how does actually the menopause sit in with it. And do you need a specific menopause policy, or actually should menopause sit as part of that absence policy? Absolutely, you know, it really needs to be considered within absence policy. Does it need to be looked at within wellbeing? Yes, absolutely. So you may find that you've actually got areas that you can, you know, apply your menopause kind of guidelines within existing policies. In terms of health and safety, legal compliance, again, when you've got your strategy, this is absolutely critical. You should be looking at health and safety risk assessments, because the workplace and the environment can actually antagonise some of the menopause conditions. So consultation, stakeholder engagement, again, when you're developing this strategy and you're looking at aims and objectives, the first thing I would say is go out to your workforce and talk to them about what do they need. I would suggest actually to really understand the business case for your workplace, do an anonymised payroll dump and just look at it by split by male, female, and by age grouping, maybe 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70 in there onwards. And you may well find that actually you've got a significant part of your workforce that sits within an age group that likely to be impacted by the menopause, and actually you've never really stopped to think about how you're supporting that. It may even be as much as a third of your workforce, and you're doing nothing to support them. So the consultation and stakeholder engagement is important, but you can do some background analysis to actually have a view on how much is this impacting your workforce. Training and awareness campaigns, critical. There is discussion later about line manager skills. Without this, then you'll never create a really positive work environment and good culture to be able to talk openly and freely about the menopause, because it is perfectly natural part of a woman's life. It's just for some reason it's been set in the background, and as Sarah was saying, you know, people don't feel able to talk about it. There's been almost, for some odd reason, a shame about it. It's not. It's a very natural part of a woman's life. And I think often I see people focus on women in their 50s. Actually, it's really critical to be talking to girls, boys, and younger women as they're coming through to understand about what the menopause is, because the perimenopause often creeps up on people, and it's only when it's become quite significant and maybe having negative impact on people's home life, their work life, that they realize that actually it is the perimenopause, or the beginning kind of, you know, they're starting to kind of that journey of the perimenopause. And by that time it's already had a negative impact on confidence, or that concern about you know, brain fog, if there is this kind of earlier Alzheimer's, you know, all of these are very stories I hear regularly about women's journey with menopause, perimenopause. And often what it is there's just not the education out there. So critical training and awareness campaigns, and that really comes back to your aims or objectives. What are you looking to achieve, and how are you going to not leave it to chance, but actually how are you going to plan those training and awareness campaigns? Work and job planning. So part of this structure could well be if somebody perhaps is impacted at that point of time with how they're you know, they're experiencing the menopause. Actually, maybe there's some tweaks to the work or their job, or how they're planning, or part of the roles that can be adapted to really help them as they're experiencing that. And that can only be very temporary. It may well be that someone experiences a different role which is kind of more suitable for them at that time, and it takes them on a different journey. So it doesn't necessarily have to be you know, a temporary or you know, a negative step, but it is about that supporting. But really look at the job planning, and then resources and signposting. Not everyone is going to want to talk about their experience, but it's important that everyone knows where they can actually find the resources and can be signposted to where best they can help. And the other area that we know and will be heard about today, peer support networks are very good. I developed a couple of years ago the training that ACAS rolls out to organisations on the menopause, and right at the early days for my initial pilot group, I invited in trade unions, public sector, small businesses, large businesses, real kind of wide mix of stakeholders to actually take them through the training we were planning to roll out, and to understand, does this meet their needs? And I still remember within that, and it was a mixed group, it was male and female, because this is important as well, because this isn't just a women's issue. This is actually something that impacts much, much wider. Yes, it impacts individuals, but it's very much about understanding you know, the journey for families and kind of the wider community as well, on how the menopause can actually impact others. And one of the organisations that was there, the head of HR for a very large construction organisation, said to me, actually, I came here for the 10% of women that work within our organisation, but actually having gone through the training today, I've just realised how important it is that we're actually widening this out across to all our employees, because actually we have a lot of men in the construction that work away. We realise there's some fantastic work going on within construction industry about well-being of men, particularly because there's some rates of suicide. But what they realise is actually often around this kind of time of the menopause, perimenopause, relationships change and become strained. Just talking about this actually gets people to understand what's happening and be able to be supportive and understand they may need support themselves. And as Sarah was saying, you know, some of that can be that they're not able to sleep because their partner's not able to sleep. So it brings in much wider support mechanisms. And if that's helping everybody within the family, or at least there's an understanding about why it's there's a change, then that helps anyone to kind of maybe reach out to get the support that they need. So I would suggest have a policy if that's one, but the most critical thing for me is have a menopause strategy and really consider all of these areas. It's just not one thing. In terms of a policy, if you were going to look at it, then I would suggest you look at what the definition and explanation is, some key principles. It's very similar to its aims and objectives, and on our website here. So when you get the slides, there is a link here to our website. There is some guidance on what we would suggest with what you might want to put into your policy. So risk assessments, it was touched earlier on. One of the questions was, should you perform a risk assessment? Yeah, absolutely. They should consider the specific needs of the individual and very much menopausal women. And of course, you can't carry out a risk assessment if you haven't had some training or some good background understanding of what is the menopause. And as Sarah said, it's actually one day. It's actually the build up, the perimenopause and postmenopause that often can have the real impact on individuals within the workplace. So issues that need looking at include temperature, ventilation, toilet facilities, access to cold water, very much temperature, but also PPE as well. The material that PPE is made out of. And one of the areas, of course, within risk assessments, and there's a growing awareness, much more so now, but so much in the past has been focused on developing risk assessments or templates of risk assessments that predominantly have been a very kind of male focus. So PPE has been designed generally for a much taller kind of physique than female. It's very, for anyone that's kind of read any of the literature recently about how much research has focused predominantly on men. One of the most fascinating one is apparently when they developed seatbelts, there was not any risk assessments on pregnant women and seatbelts. So critical when you're looking at doing your menopause risk assessments, make sure they are fit for purpose and that they are focused on, and the individual undertaking that has the training to understand what the menopause is. Workplace stress is considered and addressed properly, and part of that workplace stress is actually dignity at work, being able to talk freely about it if you want to, but not feeling that you're either categorized as over the hill, which is what I've certainly kind of come across comments about, harassment, the age discrimination that comes with it, and even the Bank of England, for those that may remember, talked about the economy being menopausal. These within the workplace, stress can be increased by negative language associated with the menopause. So very important to kind of look at where might those workplace stresses be increased. And as I said, right here at the bottom here, the kind of the differences between men and women. So look at PPE and is it suitable for so whether it's an all-in-one overall or whether it's trousers and a jacket. What's the fabric made out of, how tight fitting it is, and really reach out to your stakeholders, ask them. And one of the other areas which has been really useful that some organisations have introduced is actually body mapping as well. So kind of looking at and talking about the physique, so front and back, and actually where are those areas that they perhaps, so it's kind of anonymously, but using kind of the shape of a body that actually may well be impacted by the menopause. So that can be aches and joints. It can actually be grinding your teeth a bit more, sleeping, but obviously kind of increased bleeding. And so once you start having those body mapping, helps to actually look at, well, how does that then look at what can be done within the workplace to really support the individuals. So that could be environment. So if it's kind of sweating or heat, then actually making sure that the temperature control is right. Now, as ACAS, we come across also a lot of challenges within the workplace where different people want different temperature controls. So the issue there is, when is it too hot, when it's too cold? But there are desk fans that can be made available for individuals. So it isn't necessarily just having the windows open. It could well be that somebody's got something discreet and or what's convenient for them or right for them on their desk that allows them to be at the kind of the right temperature. Fantastic resource. I'm just going to kind of link to at the bottom here. The TUC have got a menopause workplace toolkit. Absolutely brilliant resource. I would very much recommend anyone to have a look at it. But when it comes to menopause risk assessments, they already have some a checklist and some examples within that. But this example here comes from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. Have a look at their website. There's a link there. And it goes right across, looking at health and safety, temperature, hot flushes, perspiration, aches, pains. There's quite a lot more. I've just kind of done a cut and paste here. But they give some examples here of have managers and supervisors been trained in issues related to health and safety, welfare and the menopause. So when we talk about health and safety, if somebody isn't sleeping, then actually there's a risk if they're operating machinery, perhaps if they're driving, all of those areas that need to be thought about. And that's where I come back to maybe the job design as well. It may be temporary, but what's the right thing to support them? Do workers have access to information on the menopause? Here, can women report sickness to a woman manager? It's actually more important for me to have somebody you can report it to, that you're able to have that discussion. There are challenges within workplaces that we find that some women want to talk about it and some women don't want to talk about it. Although that then talks about a woman, I think the critical thing is being able to find someone that you can talk to, or the individual can talk to freely and are comfortable to talk about. In terms of temperature, is there a policy on workplace maximum and minimum temperature, and how is it implemented? Ventilation available, and is it regularly maintained? Awful story I heard once in one of the training sessions. I say it's awful. Somebody thought they were being very kind of they're prescribing a line manager who thought they'd been very helpful, who put a fan into the workplace and said, if you're having a hot flush, all you need to do is get up from your desk and walk over to the fan and bring it to your desk, and then you can plug it in and you've got you can manage your temperature. The idea of somebody who perhaps is experiencing a hot flush at that moment having to publicly get up and go and get the fan probably isn't the best dignity policy that I would suggest. So there are, as I say, there are desk fans that people can just have on the desk, and it isn't just about people, someone with a menopause. Often other conditions, the body temperature needs to be regulated in, more with some support. So actually, it's not just about menopause; it's other individuals as well that might find it suitable. So you don't have to just say, if you're having the menopause, here's your fan. It could be something that's offered across the workforce. Here again, do uniforms and PPE reflect the needs of menopausal women? So loose clothing, natural fibres, and talks about aches, pains, dizziness. I'm actually way past the menopause now. But probably the area that I found that nobody talked about when I was first experiencing it was dry eyes. And I had a really challenging times with my eyes, very common. The more I looked into it when I was in the training course, the more I realised how common it is. My suggestion would be to look at the glasses you're using, but actually use photochromic lenses. So it's made a huge difference to me in so much the lens I have As soon as it, you know, any kind of daylight or change in daylight, it might just start to put in a sunglass effect. If I go out into the sunshine, it automatically go into sunglasses. But actually, I'm amazed how much often there is just that little bit of darkening of the lens. And that's made a huge difference to my eyes. Incredible, but I've never really read that much on that as a suggestion. So moving on, from fans to flexible working, so some reasonable adjustments that make the difference. Critical reasonable adjustments is that they are there for the individual. It isn't a one size fits all. And the most important thing, again, is having that conversation with the individual. But going back to the strategy, have a wide range of suggestions of what might work. Occupational health are fantastic, and you'll hear today, you know, Sarah's website's got some brilliant resources on it. There's some equally some ACAS resources, got some ACAS website has got some very good suggestions on this, and there are a number of other websites like CIPD and HEMPET that can give you alternative suggestions. But identify potential situations where a reasonable adjustment should be considered. So menopause, most definitely. Make sure your line managers are trained in reasonable adjustments. So it's not just about understanding menopause. They need to understand what is a reasonable adjustment, what it's there, what are the options, and it's never a one size fits all. The best way it works is the individual's suggestions, what works for them. And where it doesn't work is where it's just put in place and never reviewed. So it does need regular reviews. Mine do a fantastic wellbeing action plan template, which I can share actually a link to that. We suggest this is something that actually is across the board with everyone in the workplace. Tends to be used with people that might well be going through kind of a challenge with their well-being at a time, but I wouldn't wait for that. I think it's the wellbeing action plan is a very proactive template to use for everybody. So you've got you know, an opportunity to understand what signals someone might be showing if they are stressed. So early intervention is always the best way to support somebody. And in terms with the wellbeing action plan, it's a really good time to actually constantly review reasonable adjustments. Are they still working for you? Has that helped? Is it not? What else can we offer? What else, you know, can we do to support as an organisation? And only make the decisions after full consultation. We'll point to, obviously, for an organisation, it is reasonable adjustments. So sometimes something may not be suitable, and reasonable will apply to whether you're a small or a large organisation. Here's some kind of possible supports and adjustments, some ideas in terms of reasonable adjustments. Very simple, but again, coming back to your strategy, your stakeholder engagement, let the workplace tell you what would work for them. And often you'll find out what really isn't working. These very simple hygiene factors can make a huge difference for individuals. And it could be as much in terms of flexible working, and we've seen this with the coronavirus, so many people now working remotely. Actually, rather than having allowing somebody, if they've got a meeting, they're presenting, the option to present in person or actually being able to dial into that meeting. That means actually if particularly one day is more challenging for somebody, they've just got the option to change from actually presenting live or in a room in person to being able to still attend the meeting, but they're able to attend remotely where it's more convenient for them. And TUC, as I linked kind of earlier on, I highlighted that they've got a fantastic menopause toolkit. In here, they've got about 3 or 4 pages talking about symptoms, examples of workplace factors which could make it, could worsen the symptoms, and then suggested adjustments as well. So I would absolutely recommend having a look at this, and I'm not planning to go into detail and see how that works for you from an organisation. And then there's other areas, so not just the the reasonable adjustments you can do with an individual in terms of PPE or facilities for rest, etc. But also, as I said earlier, looking at the job content, maybe you can temporarily see if they want to go part-time. In extremes, some people may want to have a sabbatical. Keep in touch. It might work, but it's not something we see often, but it may be something that's suitable for that individual. Home working, flexible working hours. In organisations where actually it's more about the outputs, does it matter if somebody starts at 11 o'clock so they can catch up on some sleep if they find it easier to work till 8 o'clock at night? There's lots of options, which I think one of the areas that has come out of coronavirus has shown that flexible working can be applied to so many more roles than it has been in the past, and therefore be more supportive to individuals who within the workplace who may need a different approach and possibly partial retirement. But that really is for that individual to decide if that's the right thing for them. So coming on to legal requirements. So menopause, does it fit under the Equality Act 2010? And in terms of disabilities, a question that Sarah asked earlier. So actually there have been a couple of employment tribunals now that have, and I've got the details in a couple of minutes, that have actually looked at menopause being seen as a substantial long-term adverse effect on someone's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. That's the definition of a disability discrimination, where the employment judge and employment tribunal will be looking at. Menopause itself is not a disability, but many of the symptoms and the amount of symptoms that come with the menopause really does mean that potentially it becomes a disability for something that can be classed as a disability for someone that's experiencing the perimenopause, the menopause. So in terms of the workplace, need to consider the Equality Act, so that protects someone from direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, harassment and victimisation. One of the tribunal cases that Sarah mentioned earlier, actually the one with Bon Marché, harassment was a significant impact issue within that, as well as age discrimination. The Health and Safety Act 1974, every employer has got a duty to ensure that the health, safety and welfare of employees are protected. Equally, every employer has a duty to consult on health and safety with their workforce. And then there's a common law provision for duty of care for all staff as well. So just 4 cases I'm going to look at. This was one of the kind of earliest cases. This was a claim in terms that a judge allowed a claim for disability discrimination for a woman going through the menopause. This was someone that was awarded £19,000, including £5,000 for injury for feelings for disability discrimination. It was a wrongful dismissal claim, and it was someone that was using medication to support with their menopause symptoms, and there was a confusion with the medication within the Scottish courts. It was a cystitis medication that had been put into a jug of water this person was drinking, that when they were out of the room, it was then she was concerned that the water had been shared with other people within the room, and it impacted how her behaviour and there was and her performance, and eventually led to a dismissal. In fact, she was wrongly dismissed and had an award. This particular case was someone whose line manager decided, rather than to actually listen to the individual and her experiences of the menopause, actually made all their decision based on his own knowledge of the menopause of his family members, and acted, as it says here, this manager acted contrary to the organisation's own policy. The reasonable adjustments weren't correctly implemented, and again, this individual was put in a claim of discrimination and won their case. And two new cases here, Bon Marché. This went to tribunal in last December, and it was a really, I've actually pulled out the wording from the judge here, because when you read this, you can see how distressing and how the real negative impact of the harassment, the lack of support that this individual felt within the workplace, that absolutely had a negative impact on them for a long time, after they even after they left the organisation. And right at the bottom here, the judge says, I also note that for a period of about 6 months after her resignation, the claimant was housebound, and for a period after that remained socially isolated. The claimant is still suffering from stress and anxiety. She attributes to the unlawful discrimination she suffered, and was awarded in total 27,000, just under £28,000. And that's a breakdown there. So I think this one, I called out the judge's comments because it really pulls out the real negative impact that if you're not supported in the workplace on the well-being on the individual. And one last case, this one actually September 2020, and again I'm just pulling out wording. This one was about finding whether or not a claimant disabled by the reason of the menopause, was it substantial, and what the claimant, the respondent, so the employer, was saying that the argument for their case was the claimant suffered from typical menopausal symptoms, and that in the final analysis she can undertake all relevant activities and therefore the impact is not substantial. So that's why it went through the tribunal, is to understand, was actually the claimant's experience of the menopause, was it actually substantial in terms of how it impacted her, going back to the disability definition. And the respondent was saying, well, it's just typical menopause symptoms, and they, once they've got HRT, they can get on with it. In fact, the ET, very important finding this, find is that no, actually, we do find that the claimant is disabled by reason of menopause or symptoms of menopause, including anxiety and problems with concentration. Now, they also put in about whether they were disabled by reason of Raynaud's symptom. That was not found, but it was for the menopause. So it's very important for all organisations. Karen, I know you're just about to tell me off. Take this on board and apply this within your menopause strategies. Look at the findings of this so that you can best support employees within the workplace. Thank you, Karen.
That's great. Thanks, Maggie. I was not about to tell you off at all. Just before we go to a slightly longer break, I just have one question, perhaps you might address just in a minute or two for us, about how important is senior engagement when thinking about policy or strategy. I'm aware that some people on the call may not work in their HR department, they may not be senior in their organisation, but they still want to do something. Can you just spend a minute or two talking about gaining senior engagement and buy-in, regardless of the size of the organisation?
Absolutely critical. And there should, for me, I would say, if you've got a board, look at getting a sponsor from that board. You only have to go back. Sarah talked about the business case earlier. I've shared some of those comments from employment tribunal judges there on the slides, particularly the one with Bon Marché, and sorry to call it out, as an organisation, but reading that, how can an organisation not want, as a senior team, not want to get engaged to make sure that you're supporting your well-being of your workforce, and coming back down to doing a payroll dump and actually realizing how much of your workforce. When I as I said, I initially did the pilot, and I had an HR manager on that, also from a very large NHS trust, HR person, and she attended the day, and the next day I actually had the head of wellbeing ring from that trust to say, do you know what, we've never stopped to do it. Shockingly, actually, they didn't have a menopause policy. They had one of the leading menopause consultants, but nothing supporting their workplace. And they said, we've just done that exact payroll dump, and we found that about 65% of our workforce is sitting in that area, potentially impacting, and we are doing nothing to support them whatsoever. And it's not, there's a win-win here. It's a well-being of the workplace. It's making sure that people feel kind of, they're a good culture. Sarah was saying, talk about menopause, say it 5 times. I've done quite a bit of work with the some academics on this as well, about, normalizing the word within the workplace. But there's a business case. So yes, simple, sorry, you can hear I'm passionate about it. Without question, there should be senior management engagement within that, and I would get a sponsor on board.
That's right.
A male or female, it does not have to be female.
Yeah, that's what we found in our organisation as well. Thanks, Maggie. That was a tremendous presentation.
One other question there from June. Sorry, would you check demographics for women 45 to 65 or 45 plus? To be honest with you, I'd break it down all the way through. Maybe do it in 5 years, because the average age in the UK is for women to hit the menopause, that one day is 51. But yes, 1 in 100 will experience it much earlier. And there's still really little knowledge about, people of kind of maybe 40, 45 who may well be starting to experience perimenopause, and they don't realise when they hear the menopause, it actually means them. So I would certainly kind of look at all the age group but just get the message out there across the board. Are there any posters you can get to help people focus on menopause and how we can support each other? There is a fair bit of resources out there, and I think you'll probably come across that. There's some brilliant websites out there as well, and I'm sure there'll be some links to those at the end of the resources. I must apologise, I can stay, but I can't stay for very long today. But if there's anything else you would like, or anything specific, on my front slide there is my email address. Please feel free. If there's organisations that want to have a chat about how you can look at developing a strategy within your workplace, that's what we're here for. We're happy to help.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Maggie. Thanks very much for your time, for a fantastic presentation.